Hello, this is Susan Woods, your Black Lives Matter fraud investigator. Thank you so much for your time. It's been a while since I've been able to record a video, and I apologize for that. I wish my schedule allowed me to do this every day. I would do it every day, all day if I could, because this is something that I'm still passionate about, even though it's been 3.5 years since this whole fiasco started with the Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation's fraud, alleged fraud. But nevertheless, I'm going to continue. As I promised, I'm not going to stop until I feel the investigation part is over. I'm still analyzing the Form 990 information return that the Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation submitted for 2020. And I am on part 7 today, which focuses on compensation. So let's get started. So again, what is the Form 990? The Form 990 information return, also called the Form 990, is an annual report the IRS requires all 501c3 nonprofit organizations to submit to provide information about revenues and expenses for the prior year. So right now, all nonprofit organizations should have already submitted a Form 990 information return to show their revenues and expenses for the year 2022. The type of Form 990 nonprofit submits depends on the type of nonprofit organization and the amount of revenues and assets the nonprofit organization has on record. Form 990s are due by the 15th day of the 5th month after the fiscal year ends. For example, if the fiscal year ends on December the 31st, then the Form 990 is due by May 15th the next year. So if your fiscal year is ending on December the 31st, then your Form 990 is due by May 15th, 2024. The primary purpose of the Form 990 is to demonstrate transparency and accountability. Nonprofit organizations should post them on their websites. They shouldn't require people to have to go to irs.gov to download the Form 990. They should make it easily accessible for people to review. And finally, if the nonprofit team fails to file the Form 990 for 3 consecutive years, the IRS automatically revokes the 501c3 nonprofit status. So don't forget to file your Form 990 information return every single year, even if your organization did not generate any revenues at all. If you generated 0 revenues, you still have to file and let the IRS know that you generated 0 revenues, but you have an intent to continue operating a nonprofit. So that's the definition of Form 990. Let's examine the Form 990 instructions for 2020. I always encourage people to have the Form 990 instructions in front of you for the year that you are analyzing so that you can see the answers to the questions. The instructions provide the answers to each question that's answered on the Form 990. So this is a way that you can compare what an organization has written in the Form 990 to what they should have written according to the instructions. So I'm going to pause my screen for just one moment so that I can pull up the instructions for the Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation's 2020 Form 990 instructions. So just one moment, please, as I do that. Thank you for your patience. I'm still a one-woman show, which is fine, but I appreciate your patience. I'm going to go to the section that we are talking about today, and then we're going to take a look at the Form 990. Okay, so I am where I need to be, so I'm going to resume sharing. So now I am in the Form 990 instructions for 2020, and I am in part 7, which is compensation of officers, directors, trustees, key employees, highest compensated employees, and independent contractors. I didn't put all of that in the title of the presentation, I just use compensation, but it is a long title. Again, we are on part 7, which is the compensation of officers, directors, trustees, key employees, highest compensated employees, and independent contractors. This is what we're talking about. We're talking about how people are paid, how the Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation paid people in 2020, dependent upon their role. Now, the officers, directors, and trustees, they are normally your board members. These are titles for the board of directors. Some people call board members officers, some people call them directors, some people call them trustees, depending upon their positions. Normally, they are not paid. They are not compensated. So you should see 0 on the compensation line for these positions, officers, directors, and trustees. I'm going to scroll down so that you can see the definition for compensated employees and key employees. So I'm going to actually zoom in a little bit more so you can see better. But current key employees. Now, key employees are people who make over $150,000 a year. That's their reportable compensation from the organization and related organizations. So key employees earn over $150,000 per year. Highest compensated employees earn over $100,000 per year, but less than $150,000 per year. So those are 2 definitions I would like for you to keep in mind. Key employees, over $150,000 a year. Highest compensated employees are over $100,000 per year. And you have to include these positions on the Form 990. You have to list the key employees and the 5 highest compensated employees on the Form 990. So if a person earns $99,000 a year, then you don't have to list them on the Form 990. Now, that's a gaping gap, a gaping hole that the IRS allows people to jump through, in my opinion. I wanted to point that out. So now I'm going to switch back over. I'm going to pause my screen. I just wanted to share that with you. Again, this is the Form 990 instructions. And it's important to, when you are analyzing a Form 990, always have this in front of you, because you may have questions about why individuals answered questions the way they did on the Form 990. And here is where you can compare their answers to what the IRS expects the answers to be. So again, I'm going to pause this for a moment as I go back to the presentation. And thank you again for your patience as I scroll through and get back to where I need to be. And now I'm going to share again. So now I'm back, and we looked at the instructions. Again, we talked about part 7, compensation of officers, directors, trustees, key employees, highest compensated employees, and independent contractors. We're going to talk about independent contractors now. I'm going to come back to the Form 990 because I want to share something with you before I go into the Form 990. So I'm going to come back to the Form 990. So I wanted to show you images of the people that I'm going to be discussing when I go to the actual Form 990. In the Form 990, we're going to focus on Section A, which is compensated employees and independent contractors. Once again, we're not talking about the board, the officers, directors, or trustees. We're not talking about them. We're talking about the compensated employees and independent contractors. So let's talk about that. This first person that you're looking at is Kaylee Scales. She was listed as a former managing director on the Form 990 information return for 2020. And her salary was $139,625. Now, I could not find any information to clearly define her job. I couldn't find a job description, so I don't know what her job tasks were, but her compensation is listed as $139,625. So that makes her not a key employee, but a compensated employee. Then you should recognize this picture, Shalomaya Bowers. He was hired as a consultant for the Bowers Consulting Company, and he was paid in 2020 $2,167,894 for consulting services. And then, as I mentioned in another presentation, he became a member of the board. He was a member of the board at the time, which is a violation. It's a violation. A board member can't vote on yourself to receive this amount of money when you're the sole board member. I've already talked about that in a prior video, so I won't rehash that because it makes me upset. The third person that I wanted to share with you is a person that's listed on the Form 990, and his name is Damon Turner, and he has a company called Trap Hills Consulting Company, but he's a consultant. And he was paid $969,459. So these three people were listed on the Form 990 information return for the Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation for the year 2020. Kaylee Scales was a compensated employee as a managing director, $139,625. Shalomaya Bowers, his consulting firm was paid $2,167,894, and I cannot find anything tangible that they provided. And then you have Damon Turner of the Trap Hills Consulting Company. He was a consultant, and he was paid $969,459. And from what I could tell, he was responsible for doing media consulting. Okay. As we continue, I wanted to point out something about Mr. Damon Turner. Damon Turner also fathered a child with Patrice Coolers. So is there a connection between those two? Well, I'll leave it to you to judge. I'll leave that to you to speculate. But I'm curious to know, okay, what are his credentials? Why would he create a company in the same year, 2020, to all of a sudden become a media consulting expert? Oh, and by the way, he's the father of her son. Patrice Coolers, you remember her, right? She is one of the three founders of the Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation. Okay? She's the one who allegedly spent millions of dollars on 6 properties for herself from the $90 million that they generated in 2020. So here's the lovely couple, Damon Turner and Patrice Coolers. They have a child together, a son, and he just so happened to suddenly get the credentials necessary to earn $969,459 in 2020 for his media consulting skills. I don't know. And then you have Paul Coolers Protection LLC. Does the name look familiar? Well, I misspelled her name. I'm sorry. It's supposed to be ORS. But this is her brother. This is Patrice Coolers' brother, Paul. And he created a protection agency to provide protection for the Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation in 2020. And he was paid $840,993. $840,993. So I'm like, how long did he have this company? I mean, from my research, he's a professional graffiti artist. So now you're a protection agency? You provide protection? You have a protection agency, an LLC. And your sister approved your salary of $840,993. And it was said it's because they didn't trust the police They didn't trust any law enforcement agency to protect them, so they hired her brother of Kohler's Protection LLC to protect them. When I looked up his registration with the California Secretary of State's office, I see the initial filing date of July the 8th, 2020. Now, to me, that's very suspicious. That's the height. That is the height of the protest against the murder of George Floyd. That's when all of the protesting was going on, everybody was marching. And so he decided to create an LLC called Kohler's Protection LLC to protect his sister and her comrades. And his salary was $840,993. So if you add these two salaries up, the one for the father of her child and the one for her brother, you do the math. You do the math. Neither one of them, in my opinion, from what I found, was able to find, neither one of them have the credentials to even operate these types of businesses. And who comes up with these salary amounts? I mean, these are odd numbers for salary amounts to me. Who decided on these unusual amounts to pay for salaries for these two gentlemen? So all told, the total for these two, just these two positions, $1,810,452. Now, do you believe that the people who donated money to the Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation intended for their money, their $1,810,452,000? I'm sorry, excuse me, I'm so upset, I'm getting tongue-tied. Pardon me. $1,810,452. Do you think donors intended for that money to go to Damon Turner and Paul Kuhlers? I wouldn't think so. So now I'm going to pause my screen and go to the actual Form 990 information return so that we can take a look at it together and talk about it. But it's just astonishing to me. Every time I do this, every time I do this work, this analysis, I get upset all over again. All over again, I get upset because it's just amazing to me how people could just be so unconcerned about how they use money that was intended to help other people. And I know this is not unusual. It is not unusual because I'm going to share some information later on about some other prominent Black leaders who I've discovered have allegedly misused money that they generated to help Black people, quotes, to help Black people. I'm going to talk about that coming up soon, but I want to get this done, but I do want to talk about that as well because it's scandalous. So just stay tuned. I'll come back to that later. But now I'm going to share my screen so we can get into looking at the actual Form 990. So I'm on Part 7 of the Form 990 Information Return for the Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation, the year 2020. And we're looking at compensation of officers, directors, trustees, key employees, highest compensated employees, and independent contractors. Okay. So now I'm going to just scroll down. And once again, as a reminder, I've only highlighted the information in blue that I want to discuss. Everything else I'm not going to discuss, but if you're interested in learning more about it, I encourage you to go back and take a look at it. But here we have the table. The table has the different columns. You have the name and the title in the first column. Then you have the average hours per week in column B, the position, column C. Column D shows the reportable compensation. Column E shows the reportable compensation for related organizations other than Black Lives Matter. And then column F is the estimated amount of other compensation from the organization and related organizations. So we're going to talk about the first one, and I showed you the image of Kaylee Scales. Her average hours per week were listed as 0. Her position was former. She's no longer employed there, but her reportable income for 2020 was $139,625, as I mentioned to you. The second person is Patrice Coolers. She's the founder and executive director. That's the name and the title. She worked 40 hours per week, but she listed herself as an individual trustee or director and an officer. Therefore, she listed a 0 as the compensation. She didn't list herself as a compensated employee. I'm going to keep scrolling down so we can get to the total. So the subtotal was $139,625, and the grand total was the same because there's only one person that was listed as a paid employee, a former paid employee. Now we're down to the independent contractors, because independent contractors are people who work on a 1099 basis. So you have in column A, the name and business address. Column B, the description of the services they provided. In column C, you have the compensation. I only highlighted 2 because I'm not familiar with the other 3 enough to be critical of them. But I start with Bowers Consulting Firm. Again, that is Shalomaya Bowers, who was a member of the board, who gave his company, $2,167,894. And then Trap Hills LLC is Damon Turner, and that is Patrice Coolers' father's, I'm sorry, I'm trying to say it eloquently. Damon Turner owns Trap Hills. He fathered a child with Patrice Coolers, and his description of services is live production, design, and media for $969,459. Okay, so those are the 2. I've already identified them in the images that I shared. Now I'm going to go to page 52. This is where I found the entry for Patrice Coolers' brother, Paul. And it's listed under a Schedule L. A Schedule L. Schedules are intended to provide additional information, like supplemental information about things that are reported in a 990, and you have to report them in the appropriate type of schedule. So Schedule L Part 4 allows you to elaborate on business transactions involving interested persons. An interested person is a person that has a relationship between someone that has a prominent position in the organization, whether it be on the board, whether it be a key employee or one of the highest compensated employees. You have to disclose the relationship. And so they disclose that Paul Coolers is a family member of the founder, and the amount of the transaction, you notice how they said the transaction is $840,993, which tells me it was maybe a one-time transaction. So I'm going to scroll down and let you read how they define this particular entry. So it's a Schedule L Part 4, business transactions involving interested persons. The name of the person is Paul Coolers, Coolers Protection LLC. B, relationship between interested person and organization. Family member of founder and executive director. They could have just said the brother or the sibling. I get how they're trying to be evasive here. And then D, description of transaction, one-time, professional security services. So this is why it's so important to analyze Form 990s so that you can get an understanding of the information that they share. Does this mean the information is accurate? No. The accountant can only report what the person sharing the information provides. This is not a guarantee of accuracy. Now, of course, a forensic accountant can go back and validate this information with bank records, with transactions. You can certainly find out whether or not this information is accurate, but this is what was provided to the accountant. This is not a result of an external audit. This is a result of information being provided to the accountant that created the Form 990. An external audit is when the accountants can come in and audit your books instead of you just providing them with the information. Okay, so now I'm going to pause my screen and go back to the presentation. And it's still distressing, even though it's been 3.5 years now. 3.5 years I've been analyzing this organization and reporting on it. And the more I report on it, the more it's annoying to know this money is basically gone. They have less than $1 million right now. So it's basically gone. And I will provide information on, the current standing later on. I just want to get through the Form 990 investigation or analysis, and then I'll get to where they are today. Like, where are they now? So now I'm sharing with you the red flags that I've identified, and I've identified four total red flags in part 7, compensation of officers, directors, trustees, key employees, highest compensated employees, and independent contractors. I've identified 4 red flags, and Kaylee Scales being one. About her salary, I couldn't find any data to support what she was doing to earn $139,625. Bowers Consulting, the $2 million. Trap Hills, the $900,000, and then Colors Protection, $840,000. I identified all of these things as red flags, in my opinion. So now I've been adding up the red flags for each section, each part that I've talked about. And you can see here the heading, I identified 4 red flags, part 1, 4, and so on and so forth. You can read the rest all the way down to part 6, and then the grand total was 35. Now I've added an additional slide to continue. So I've carried over the subtotal of 35 to add on the 4 that I identified in this section, which we have a cumulative of red flags of 39 red flags that I've identified, and we're just on page 8. Page 8 of the Form 990. Of course, I skipped down to page 52 to look at Schedule L, but you have 39 red flags in this one Form 990 for the Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation for 2020. I think that's remarkable. Up next, what we're talking about next, in the next video, I'm going to be talking about part 8, and it's the statement of revenue. We're gonna analyze the Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation's statement of revenue in the next video. I'm Susan Woods of Susan Woods Nonprofit Solutions, and I am your Black Lives Matter fraud investigator. Thank you so much for your time, and have a great day.